we were talking about time starvation and how this is an experience that's very much part of modern life, modernity, especially in urban settings. And let me just see, there we go. Sarah Sharma, who's a scholar who wrote this book in the meantime, makes also a very important point, which is that this idea of time shortage or starvation is not uniform, but it's actually distributed unevenly according to gender, class, and race, right? So privilege actually does play a role in our relationship to time, and that should not be surprising. Um, but what's actually interesting to me is that this idea of time starvation is just one among many experiences that arises in consciousness. And as such, it is a subjective, physically conditioned relationship to time. And I'm particularly interested in spiritual practices or aesthetic interventions that can help relieve this experience of time starvation. And more importantly, that they can open up or facilitate different relationships, different subjective experiences of time. Um, so enter Ota Shogo. Ota Shogo was a Japanese playwright, director, and theater artist who emerged as one of the pivotal figures in the Japanese avant-garde theatrical scene in the second half of the 20th century. I would argue that together with Tadashi Suzuki, Ota Shogo is the best known Japanese theater director here in the West. I'd be curious to hear from our Japanese friends, whether this is a name that they're familiar with or what's the stature of Ota Shogo right now in Japan. I'll also mention that most of the research that I'm presenting today in this talk comes from this book by Mary Boyd, The Aesthetics of Quietude, Ota Shogo and the Theater of Divestiture. So that's kind of my main source. But to kind of situate him in a context, Ota Shogo came up in the context of the student protest of the late 1960s in Tokyo and also globally. And in the 1970s, he became a very important figure in the Angura or underground theater scene in Japan, which was kind of responding or reacting against Western style realism in theater. This is, of course, the 1970s, a time when Buto, which is a form of dance theater, is being pioneered by Tatsumi Hijikata, whom you see on the right, and Kazuo Ono on the left. And, I think it's undeniable that Ota Shogo is very influenced by Buto and by Buto's relationship to time and silence. But he's able to fashion and develop his own kind of philosophical and aesthetic practice, which he termed the drama of silence or theater of quietude. And just to kind of give you a very, very condensed version of this aesthetic, I would argue that it's built on three main pillars. The first one is the idea of silence. Ota Shogo has multiple artistic periods. In the 1970s, he's writing a lot of surrealist plays that use language, but his mature period, which begins in 1981, consists of a cycle of wordless plays, plays that have no spoken dialogue, no monologues, no soliloquies. Verbal language has been removed out of the equation. And we might talk about what other kinds of languages are foregrounded when you do that. So that would be pillar number one, this idea of silence. Number two is the idea of stillness. But this is stillness expressed as glacially slow movement, right? It's not a total stoppage of movement, but it's a radical slowing down of the temporal rhythms of the human body. And then the final one is this idea of theater occurring in an empty space or almost empty space, very minimalist settings that use elemental materials, be it water, earth, wind, or fire. And I think before I move on, there's a couple of quotes that Ota Shogo expressed. You know, he said that, quote, "Only what is difficult to express should be the material of art," which is quite provocative. And then he also posed this fundamental question, quote, "Is it not possible to construct a drama from the nature of human existence itself, rather than from the elements of human behavior?" What does that mean? To me, I take this to mean that most traditional theater looks at human psychology and behavior as the object of dramatic inquiry. But I think that Ota Shogo is much more interested in our experience as a species, right? And you know, of thinking about humanity in much larger, abstract, and universal terms. So the play where all of these ideas crystallize is The Water Station. And The Water Station premiered in 1981 in an underground space in Tokyo. It was remounted in 1984. And something that I find really moving is that this play originates from a personal experience in Ota Shogo's life. His family lived in Japanese-occupied Manchuria during the late 1930s and World War II. In fact, Ota Shogo was born in Manchuria in 1939. And when he was 6 years old, as World War II was coming to an end, the Japanese settlers of Manchuria were expelled and displaced. And he talks about one of his earliest memories is of being on a road, on a dirt road, walking away from his home and seeing all these other displaced Japanese people carrying with them and on them as many of their possessions as they could. Furniture, pets, suitcases, right? And as the day progressed, he started noticing a lot of these possessions being abandoned by the side of the road, right? Because the weight, I guess the weight of these things kind of made itself felt. And that becomes the central image of this play, The Water Station. The way the water station functions is that we encounter a group of displaced people, perhaps refugees, who are escaping some sort of unnamed cataclysm that we never really get to find out. And they enter the stage one by one in groups of two. There is also a caravan, which you see an image here. And every single one of them encounters a trickle of water that is on stage. And that interaction with the water releases something significant in them. Ota's original play has 9 scenes or 9 episodes, so to speak. And something that's really interesting, the play starts with a little girl entering, and the final scene also includes that little girl who comes back. So there is this cyclical structure, just like the cycle of water, right? Suggesting an idea of eternal return or an experience of time that is circular rather than linear. And before I show you a couple of clips from a production that I directed in 2022 of The Water Station, I want to show you what the script of a wordless play looks like. So this is Ota Shogo's original script with the original set design that he employed. But what's really interesting is that the script is broken into 3 columns. One describing the main action, another one describing a secondary action, and then a third column with stage directions that pertain to light, sound, music, etc., etc. So essentially what he is creating is a movement score, not unlike the movement scores of Butoh that I've had a chance to look at. And I'm just going to read a few lines here at the top because they have the eloquence of a poem, actually. So Ota Shogo writes, toward the fine line of water, the red cup. The transparent line disappears into the red cup. In the gaze of her eyes, the girl's eyes, the red cup fills with water. From the line of water, the red cup moves to the girl's mouth. The girl drinking water. The water flowing through her body. The empty cup. The sky in the girl's eyes. And if you're an actor, this is pure theatrical gold. The amount of sensory detail and imagery that is being conveyed here is quite remarkable, in my opinion. Now, I've already mentioned that one of the most striking things about Ota Shogo's aesthetic and about the water station is the extreme temporal dilation that comes with the use of slow tempo. And he actually, somewhere else in the script, he prescribes the speed of movement and indicates that actors should move at a pace of 2 meters in 5 minutes. So that's like what, 6 feet? 6 feet in 5 minutes, 7 feet in 5 minutes, right? That is the time signature that these actors are meant to inhabit, right? A truly glacial tempo. And I love that, both of you, Brendan, you both talked about what it was like to come out of this retreat. And the New York Times wrote a review of the original production of The Water Station, which came to New York. And let me see. Oh, before we get there, these are some photographs from the original production that Ota Shogo directed. You can see that there is like a little faucet with real water and a basin catching it. And there is also, it's hard to see, but there's like a pile of abandoned suitcases and personal objects. But anyway, this is what Mel Gasso from the New York Times wrote. Mr. Ota has intentionally slowed his play almost to a standstill, making every second seem like a minute. Sometimes the movement is so minimal that it is imperceptible. Moving gracefully, but with glacial slowness, the people are like frozen figures. During those rare moments when there is a quick gesture by one of the actors, one is startled out of what has become a trance-like state. Returning to fast-paced New York life after the performance, one undergoes nothing short of a cultural shock. And I think, this rings very true to my own experience of slow tempo. And I think that an audience who endures 2 hours of this has two choices. They can fight it and be in a state of mental health for 2 hours, or seek to distract themselves and disassociate from the experience, or you kind of can choose to surrender and attain that kind of trance-like state where your experience of time actually becomes quite expansive and nourishing. So I think maybe this is now a good time to share a couple of the clips that I have, and these are from, once again, a production that I directed in 2022. I'm gonna show you two different moments. And the first clip is under 5 minutes, but it will likely feel longer than that. And if this is helpful at all, I invite you to enter this as a sort of meditation where you can be mindful of any thoughts or internal monologue that arises for you. Or if you notice your mind checking out and going somewhere else, gently bringing it back when you realize that has happened. So anyway, hopefully the sound will come through on Zoom as well. This first clip is actually quite silent. There's only the sound of water trickling, and I'll just go ahead and play. So that was clip number one. And here's the second one, which comes later in the play, towards the midway point. Okay, so maybe this is a good place to open it up for discussion and exchange and questions, maybe. What do you think?
Yeah. Okay.
I'm curious to hear whether any of our colleagues in Japan have encountered Ota Shogo's work before, or I'm curious about any thoughts that came out for you as you were watching the videos, or any questions. I guess we can be very general.
When I was watching, I felt frozen. And at one moment, I felt like I was sinking into the earth. And that last moment, the slap, it felt like a stab in the heart. It felt like so much more violent because I had been in that trance-like state. Like I was violently shoved outside of it.
Yeah, I was also struck by the by violence, the thought of violence in the second scene that you showed, the second clip that you showed, you know, and the I don't know how to put words to it, but the strange feeling of seeing violence unfolding in silence and in slow motion, which is not, I mean, it's the complete opposite of how we typically see violence portrayed and how we think of violence, right? We think about speed and noise and, you know, and that juxtaposition of, as you said, the silence, the stillness, and the empty space, but then these scenes of violence.
Maybe I can talk a little bit more about this because this question was very, very important to this particular production and to me. So I was starting to go into pre-production for this, just as George Floyd was being murdered. And I don't know if you saw the video, right? But that video took 9 minutes and 26 seconds. And, you know, that kind of got me thinking about questions of slow violence, because you're right. Typically, violence feels fast and furious and immediate, right? We think of gunshots and bombs going off and car crashes and slaps, right? But there's a philosopher called Richard Nixon, no relationship to the president, who also talks about violence that occurs over the span of years or decades, particularly as we think about environmental destruction, about the way that certain communities are gradually starved out of resources, right? So to me, that opened up a lot of perspectives in terms of the speed of violence and the speed of things. And this particular scene that I show you is not in the original Ota Shogo play per se. I invited the cast that I was working with to generate their own characters and to bring their own concerns and interests to the play. And since most of that kind of remains secret and, you know, the audience is only reading the externals, right? This allowed for actors who were working with like Holocaust survivor narratives from their grandparents, right? To Brent, who was the African-American actor on that chair who's dead, which to me was a way of thinking about or gesturing towards what was happening racially in the United States. And this was not in the video, but immediately after the slap, you know, this group, this caravan, the 2 men in this caravan have determined that this person is dead. So what they do is something that I witnessed in Los Angeles when I first moved there. Los Angeles has a very, very large homeless population. And one day my wife and I were sitting on a bench in Santa Monica in a park, and a homeless man was asleep on the bench. It was like 4 p.m. And 2 other homeless men came and started going through his pockets and stealing from him. And that's exactly what happens, following this moment in the clip. This dead body is searched, and anything that's valuable, including that chicken, is taken away. And you know what's going to happen to that chicken at around dinner time, right? You know, I'm grateful for your question because the notion of violence was really, really central to our thinking when working on this.
Please just feel free to unmute
Yes.
yourself. You know. Shizuko.
Chizuko, and
you
you're muted.
have to unmute yourself.
Yeah,
Sensei.
I was very much moved by the first video. Since I was born in Manchuria, 10 months after Japan lost the World War II. So it reminds me of some of my parents' stories before they repatriated to Japan. But the most moving thing, which came to my mind was these two men started to drink water trickles. And there was no conversation at all. And there was not so much interaction of the eyesight at first, but then they were gradually seems to be communicating with each other. And even though they were trying to get a trickle of water, they were not violent against each other. And somehow at the end, it seems to me, my feeling is that they kind of embraced with each other. And that reminds me, and also the eyesight of these two people reminds me of the sense of loss and grief that they must have went through before coming to this point. But somehow the last moment of they were almost embracing with each other, and lips were close with each other. And so it reminds me, well, if this kind of play were held in Ukraine or in Gaza, two people from different sides, enemy and so forth, what would happen? Something like that. So it was really, really moving for me. Yes. That's all.
You mentioned Ukraine Chisuku, and this was one of those like really weird coincidences. This production opened on February 17th of 2022, and Russia invaded Ukraine 4 days later. And then we started seeing photographs of Ukrainian families with their pets and their suitcases going across the border into Poland. And like, it just made the play relevant in a way that we were not thinking about when we started rehearsals.
Mm.
Yeah, I had like Chizuko, I was fascinated with the first clip, the eyes, the expressions of the
Yes.
actors, like the deep kind of sadness and maybe some anger that expressed through the eyes. And I think so this was really yeah, like I was comparing my experiences of watching sort of Japanese theater, very slow kinds of theater, where actors are almost expressionless, so we don't see much happening in the face, and it's more through the body movements that we feel something. But in this play, my attention was not so much on the body, but it really was on the eyes. And so this was something, a new kind of way of seeing a slow theater. And in the second clip, I was struck by, I think it was a woman in the back, sort of towards the back of the theater. There was one figure who didn't move much, but somehow her sort of bodily presence was kind of different from the other people who were moving more to the side. So I was curious about her place in the story and what created that. It was almost she was in a different time zone, I thought, from the others. So I was interested in that aspect as well. Yeah. So it's actually I didn't know about Ota Shogo, but to know that there's this lineage from Buddha, which I'm very interested in, gave me some sense of of the play in context, and I'm curious to learn more about his works. Yeah, sorry, I have to leave in about 5 minutes, so I kind of wanted to make my comment first, and it's a short workshop, but I hope we can continue these conversations.
Thank you, Yuki.
If I may, yeah, thank you for these examples and for bringing this play back to life in some ways. This is very interesting. I have one comment and one question. For me, actually, maybe both are questions. One is related to the different time qualities between an animal that, of course, cannot act slowly and lives in real time, and how for a director, how does that work? What does it mean to have simultaneously these two times? And the other is also the two layers of the director's take on it. And since I don't know the play itself, I was even curious. Some of these observations that I share very much how strong these were. Like, for example, this scene between these two men, to what extent this matches what was scripted, and to what extent it was your decision to, yeah, which elements come from Ota and which elements come from you. I'll be very interested in that, because I think it's, as Yuki said, something there's, I maybe didn't expect some of it culturally, thinking that this is Ota, this is Japan. I was not expecting some of it. So I'm just wondering, is it, I just don't know Ota or Japan enough, or was I sensing actually this layer that's maybe not strictly Japanese there?
Yeah, I'll start with the first question about the animal, and something that it took me a while to understand as I started rehearsing the play was that, in fact, the structure of the play is created through subtle counterpoints of speed, right? So from the get-go, you do have one marker of real time, which is the water dripping, right? The water dripping is not dripping in slow tempo, right? That kind of sets a time baseline against which we can judge and perceive the very exaggerated glacial slow tempo of the performers, right? So that kind of gave me permission as a director to think about bringing another element that was tethered into our temporal reality, which was the chicken, right? But then within each scene, there are these like moments that flash by, like the slap, or like the moment when the lips of the two men actually touch, where there is an actual acceleration. And in a way, that's how the drama of the piece is constructed, I feel, by juxtaposing these different time signatures in quite subtle and not so subtle ways. So maybe hopefully that answers the first question. As for the second question, the scene between the two men is in the original 1981 Japanese performance. And as a queer person, I really responded to that when I was reading about it. And the two actors that I work with found it very, very meaningful to talk about this suppressed desire that all of a sudden kind of erupts after they have contact with the water. But you're right that a lot of the production I directed departed significantly from Ota in the specifics, but I want to believe that in the spirit, it was very much paying homage and respecting his intentions. So I would say, maybe it was like a 60% we kept things from the original, and 40% was our own take and contribution. I mean, the costumes, as you can see, are modern day modern day costumes. The actors are wearing sneakers. That was not part of the original production, which felt more like period-like. It was, I think, closer to like the 1940s Manchuria experience that he probably had. But yes, that I guess that hopefully that answers the balance between innovation and respecting the original intentions of the playwright.
Yeah, thanks so much. Yeah, definitely. I really appreciate it. I really, I was trying to understand where my question was coming from, what was it triggered by, and the maybe I was not surprised. The queerness or two men kissing is not Japanese, but I guess maybe I was prompted a little bit by Yuki's comment on how the face is acting, and maybe some of it between the faces, and of course we had it in close up, and so that there's a kind of a different aspect to it as well that just brought and you're right, the clothing even subconsciously moved me into a different culture. So I was probably unfortunately for my comment, I do feel that yeah, I don't have a problem with it actually. It was just a kind of a sensitivity of layering of culture, which I don't think it's wrong. It's just rich.
I mean, you bring an excellent point about the fact that these are recordings that use close up in a way that, as an audience in the theater, you have a very different access to the face and the eyes of the performer. And of course, we were also using subtle jump cuts in the edit. So the scene that you saw with the two men actually was 12 minutes long. But when you are applying for fellowships and you need to submit a work sample, they want something shorter than 5 minutes. So of course, you're actually not really getting the full experience or full impact of the slow tempo because it's a compressed representation of that. But on the other hand, we were rehearsing this during that time in the pandemic where we were finally allowed to be in person, but everybody had to be masked. So for 6 weeks of rehearsal, I was seeing my actors, just like the eyes. And I think that I'm not surprised to hear that the eyes were so prevalent in your experience of this, because for 6 weeks, these poor actors were just acting with their eyes. And I remember they were allowed to remove their masks on the second dress rehearsal, 2 days before we opened. And it felt like I had been watching a black and white movie, and I love black and white movies, but suddenly we were in a Technicolor world. The moment those masks came off, it was so drastic, and it almost became a different experience altogether.
Mhm.
Rob, were you going to say something?
I just wanted to make a comment. Thank you so much. I was thinking a bit about the cartography of emotion and how that relates to cartography of time. That in some ways in the first film, which to be honest, I felt unbearable. And I noticed having a lack of resource today, it was unbearable for me to watch in some ways because it was so emotionally complex. And I was thinking about the neuroscience, the mind, culture, and brain part of it. Part of my experience of emotion, our experience of emotion, is it happens before we're aware of it. And so all of a sudden chocolate is being eaten, and all of the joy and the desire and the feelings that led up to the action are almost imperceptible to our own self, right? But somehow I felt like this elongation of time made that emotional landscape apparent. And so I think I watched you know, like, oh, a water as the salvation in the first person, and now there's someone else. Now there's a little bit of uncertainty or I don't know what it was. And then there was almost I felt like someone's, you know, who's getting the water first, and then that turned into something looking like affection and love. And so it was just, yeah, it was fascinating in a way that I feel like you were able to make, Hector, emotion quite clear in its complexity, whereas usually it's not, because it's so fast and subliminal. I don't know. That's just the comment that I had.
I'm glad you said that, Rob, because that's actually like exactly the question I was going to ask. Was for the cognitive science people here, like watching this, and this is I have the benefit of Hector came to my class a couple of weeks ago, so this is the second time I'm getting to see this, and got to experience a lot more of his work in that. The idea of like the rate-based nature of cognitive processes, and like what happens when you slow that down, you know, and the connection to meditation, which you drew explicitly, of like what happens to the mind and the brain when you're slowing down. And we associate that level of speed with very different kinds of processes. Like, and so if you're watching that, you know, what is happening as you're aligning yourself with that, you know, how the nervous system is changing, like, and how that is then changing cognition. And then, so what that does to emotions, I'm just kind of fascinated by that. And then also the juxtaposition, which you mentioned, which is on the one hand, you have this slowing down, but then in both scenes, you had stuff that was in real time, so to speak. You had the water and you had the chicken, right? And then you had also the slap.
Right.
So the kind of like cognitive and emotional complexity that creates, which is very unusual and very different, I think, you know, as Rob was pointing out. And it just made me think like, you know, I've never thought so much about cognitive and emotional processes being so rate-based, and like what happens when you change that, or then even juxtapose it. And it does seem to create these very complicated experiences in the audience. So I'm just fascinated by it. I have no answers. I'm just like curious what people think about that. And are there people actually like that you're aware of that study this? And because like suddenly I thought, well, maybe like so much of what we know about the mind and brain and emotions is just is like time dependent, you know, time and rate dependent in a certain way that I just never thought about before.
Yeah, Rob, thank you so much for your comment, because it was great, because it was contrasting with my own experience. I felt so calm, so peaceful. I mean, just watching this, but it made me think about a movie called Maboroshi by Koreeda. You might want to check
I will need to check it.
Yeah,
You will love it. It's really slow.
Because it's really slow to the point that even though this time slowing down thing right after 1 week of Garrison meditation, we shared that. That was my favorite movie. My husband, well, he was quite early in a marriage. He couldn't take it because it was so slow. It's really slow. It's about the woman who lost her husband. She's grieving, but it was this really extremely slow pace. I felt both this kind of calmness, but I could feel her grief very deeply. While I was like resonating that deeply, there was this American husband who was, what's the point of this movie? You know, it's what's the ending? It's like, what's beginning and ending? There's no beginning and ending. It's about grief. So I felt very similar when I was actually watching yours, especially the first one. And I also actually, it made me think about the time when I watched No theater for the first time when I was a college student.
Right.
It was my first time. I mean, No is really slow and not much sound. I actually fell asleep a few times, but yet there was this very deep impact on me. So it's almost because it puts you in, as you said, in a trance-like state. It's almost like when you are rising from your sleep, you are kind of becoming awake, but your conceptual mind is not yet active.
Right.
And there's a very unique experience you might have because you're able to, if you see sunlight, without this conceptual thinking, analyzing and distracting with your, it's almost like, I should say pure experience, but you are perceiving the phenomena, the world as it is, sense. So I really experienced that when I was watching both scenes, even though, yeah, the last lap is definitely
Jolting.
joking. Yeah.
I have a comment that maybe is somewhat connected to your question. There's an American theater artist called Bob Wilson, Robert Wilson. He's in his 80s right now. And he, to my mind, is the only Western artist who uses slow tempo in a lot of his work. You might have heard Einstein on the Beach, which is a Philip Glass minimalist opera. He directed that at the Met in the 80s. Anyway, Bob Wilson talks about arriving at this idea of slow tempo in terms of two experiences. He talks about the speed of clouds crossing the sky, or the speed at which we perceive the sun to rise, right? As being a foundational experience for him. And then he talks about watching a film that was done by some researcher in psychology, and I would have to like look it up, but it's a video of a mother that's rushing towards her crying baby, who's in the crib. But if you play that video almost frame by frame, there is a couple of frames where you actually see anger flash in the face of the mother, right? And you're only able to perceive that if you're going, if you're scrubbing it frame by frame, because otherwise what you perceive is a mother trying to comfort and placate her crying infant. But there is this moment, and we were talking about how a lot of emotion happens below the threshold of perception, right? And I feel like that's a perfect example of it. So Bob Wilson took slow tempo as a kind of magnifying lens to look at these things that usually just fly under the radar of our perception. So maybe that's somehow connected to what you were asking about. I don't know.
And that's what Korea does.
Yeah.
Yeah, with the Maboshi film.
Yeah, and it's so interesting how you said, put under the microscope. Like, what happens when you slow down? You see things in a different resolution.
Yeah.
And Rob alluded to that, I think that's kind of at the heart of contemplative practice and meditation too, at least certain forms of contemplative practice. What happens when you really slow things down?
Yeah.
And also, there's just so many similarities between your work and Ota Shogo's work and meditation, because also the boredom. Like you said, you have two ways of experiencing this. Either you're going to be in agony, or you're going to kind of transition into a peaceful state where you slow down, and that's exactly my experience in meditation. It's the first time I tried to meditate for hours. Yeah, it's agony. Agony.
I kind of feel like we're talking about two different possible lenses on the slow tempo. One of them that you just described is as a microscope that is going to reveal things that happen too quickly to otherwise be noticed, and the other is sort of a transformative thing where it changes the emotion to move it into a slow tempo, and that's kind of more what I was thinking as I was watching. Just that with the nature, the embodiment of emotion is such that, like, when you slow things down, certain kinds of emotions may be not really accessible to you because they're related to very fast body action, to tension, to this sort of things. And as I was watching the first video, as Rob was saying, there is a lot of trying to figure out what's going on. There's wants the water, then there's some competition, then there was is there actually he's getting it, and even as they start to both try to drink out of the same, I was like, this is starting to seem like affection to me, but is that just because it's slow? And maybe if they were doing it at full speed, they'd be ramming their faces and fighting over the water. And eventually it became clear to me that it was more affectionate, but there was that moment I couldn't figure out what it was.
But thank you for saying that, because when I was seeing the body movement, I wasn't quite sure, because one person was like holding on to the other person's
Yeah.
torso
Yeah.
and was pushing that way, right?
Yeah.
Because it was slow, it looked like a dance. I was
Yeah.
quite sure. Were they fighting for the better spots for the water? But with the slow motion, it, as many people said, looked like moment of affection. But it was very interesting. If you were just going for the water, you don't need to be grabbing onto somebody's torso, right? So it looks like maybe a bit of the aggression.
Well,
Or
that-
what?
And
I
that's
don't know.
we keep talking about juxtaposition and complexity and ambiguity.
Yeah.
It's all that coming out in that.
Mm.
It's really interesting.
Yeah, thank you for saying that, because I was like wondering, no, what is this? Then still the body, he's pushing one person to the side and it's like rocking back and forth. So.
Chiara? Are you gonna say
Yes. Yeah, about the scene, that's the same scene. I thought, I was wondering, actually wanted to ask Hector also about so water. We have not talked so much about water, but I think that there is, of course, the sound of water that keeps us there, but also this shining characteristic of water. So to me, this two very, very powerful sensory things coming at me, it seems that the two people must have had the same. So for me, that was really a kiss, because they really became one, it seemed to me. So at the beginning, maybe they had the representation of water or the need for water, or they were thirsty or whatever. So there was like mediated by many things. But at some point, if what happens to them is what happens to me, at some point, because of this multiple sensory like like there is no coding anymore, there is just like the shining and the sound. So then you focus, you converge. So in a way, I think they were converging as maybe we all also were converging, as some of us peacefully, as some other one like Robert, like not wanting to converge, I don't know. So this struggle, but there is so much force in this water drawing us close. And I think it's so I was wondering if there was, that also was something that you as the director also was thinking of creating.
I mean, what comes immediately to mind is that for me, every time I rewatch this clip, I just feel thirsty, whether I've had a sip of water before or not. There's just something that gets triggered. And this also reminds me, this is a bit anecdotal, but I have a good friend who came to see the opening night of Water Station, and he neglected to go to the restroom, and his bladder was quite full. And this is a 2-hour-long play, no intermission. So he was in excruciating pain across multiple scales of physical and psychological and emotional distress, and hated the experience. But then he came back on closing night, which to me, that's heroic. The fact that he wanted to come back on closing night, prepare for it, and he had a very different experience, right? But yes, to your point, Chiara, the water is the main character in the play in many ways, right? Because of what it's able to do to the characters, to do to us in the audience, what it can release and trigger in these encounters. So yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the water. It's in the title, it's there, and we had not talked about it yet.
We're at the end of our time. And I wonder if Isan is writing, the water is the main character. That's brilliant. Just before we end, I wonder, Dietz and I were talking about whether, so this is the first, hopefully in a series of conversations that we have like this. And so I'd like to just hear, like, first of all, you know, would you like to continue this conversation? Is this interesting? And should we try to schedule another one within maybe towards the end of April or early May. Maybe we're reaching the end of our semester here. Any thoughts about that?
I don't know if there's time, but I found it exceedingly rich. And I also just wanted to say, Héctor, thank you for bringing time into the contemplative science, contemplative studies landscape. It's so strangely absent, and yet it seems so essential to whatever contemplation is. So I think this is such a great example of where the arts and the humanities enrich, at least in my experience as a scientist, thinking about these things. So I just wanted to thank you, and I would be so happy to participate in the future. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Rob. Well, we'll send out a poll maybe about when we can meet and try to find another time. Yeah, we'd love to do this again, and maybe next time we'll have a presenter from the Japan side and be able to do this again. So we will be in touch. And thank you all so much for being here. And please join me in thanking Héctor again for such an incredible presentation.